Sister-in-law DNA tested my daughter behind my back and paraded the results on my daughter. All right, so here's the situation. I've got a daughter, Lily. She's 6 now, and she's basically the best thing that's ever happened to me. But here's the twist. She's not my biological daughter. There's no blood relation between us at all. And before you ask, no, I didn't have a secret affair or some hidden relationship. It's actually way more complicated than that. But I'll try to keep things as straightforward as I can. Lily's mom was my best friend. We literally grew up together, like from the time we were kids until, well, everything that happened. We were never romantically involved. There were never any weird feelings or anything like that. Just two close friends who supported each other through everything. She met her husband when we were in our early 20s, and they were great together. I wasn't close to him in the same way I was with her, but he was a good guy. But life's messed up sometimes, you know? About 6 years ago, there was a horrible incident. My friend and her husband were at work, just doing their normal day-to-day stuff, and something terrible happened at their workplace. I won't go into too much detail because I want to keep some things private, but the bottom line is they didn't make it out. It was a workplace shooting. It was all over the news for a while. When it happened, Lily was just a newborn, like 3 months old. Now, here's the thing. Both my friend and her husband came from less than ideal family situations. They didn't have any siblings, and their parents weren't in the picture at all. I mean, technically they existed, but there was no way those people were going to be a part of Lily's life. They weren't safe people to be around, if you get what I'm saying. So, with both her parents gone and no extended family, Lily didn't have anywhere to go. I don't even think anyone thought about who'd take care of her in case something happened. I guess you don't really plan for that kind of thing, especially when you're young. Anyway, the thought of Lily ending up in the foster system just didn't sit right with me. I mean, I didn't want kids before all this. I wasn't really into the idea of being a parent. But here's this little girl, completely innocent, with no one to take care of her. It felt wrong to just stand by and let her grow up without any connection to her parents. So, I made the decision to adopt her. I'm not going to lie. It was hard at first. I had no idea what I was doing. Babies are not easy, and suddenly being responsible for this tiny human was terrifying. But the thing is, I learned to love her. It wasn't immediate, or some big emotional moment where I suddenly realized I was her dad. It was more gradual, like each day I spent with her, I got more attached, and she became more of my kid. And now, I can't imagine life without her. Everyone in my family knows the situation. They all know Lily's not my biological daughter. It's not some big secret or anything. I've been open with her, too. She knows she's adopted and that her real parents are gone because of a bad man. She doesn't know the full details, obviously, because she's still young, but she knows enough. And honestly, she doesn't really ask about it much yet. The funny part is, people often assume she's my biological kid. Like, she doesn't look anything like me at all, but people will just think she got all her looks from her mom. And I don't correct them. Why would I? It doesn't really matter to me what they think. If they want to assume she's mine, that's fine. I'm not going to sit there and explain the whole adoption story to random strangers. So that's the setup for the real story I'm trying to get to. A few weeks ago, we were at my parents' house for one of those big family gatherings. My brother's fiancée, who we'll call Sarah, was there with their 1-year-old son. We've all been getting along fine. I don't know Sarah super well, but she's been with my brother for a couple of years, and they've got a kid together, so she's part of the family now, I guess. Anyway, while we were there, Sarah saw this old photo hanging up in the hallway. It's a picture of me, my friend, Lily's mom, and her husband from way back when. We were probably in our early 20s at the time, all smiles and hanging out at some park. Sarah pointed at the picture and asked, "Who's this?" I explained that it was Lily's mom and her husband. I could see Sarah kind of processing the info, like she was putting things together in her head. She got real quiet and just stood there staring at the picture for a while. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe she just didn't know the whole backstory or didn't realize Lily wasn't my biological kid. It's not like I go around announcing it to everyone I meet. But the rest of the night, Sarah seemed a little off. You know when someone is being nice to your face, but there's something off about how they act? That's what it was like. Fast forward a bit, and we're all sitting around the dinner table. Out of nowhere, my parents announced they were setting up a college fund for both Lily and my brother's son. They were going to give each kid $50,000 to start them off when they got older. I was completely blown away by that. It's such a generous thing to do, and I could tell my brother and I were both really happy about it. But here's where things started getting weird. After that night, I noticed Sarah getting a little distant from Lily. Like, whenever Lily tried to play with her son, Sarah would come up with an excuse to separate them. She'd say he needed a nap, or that he was hungry, or whatever. But even if Lily was just asking Sarah something simple, like, "Can I help with the baby?" Sarah would brush her off, saying she was busy even when she clearly wasn't. She was just on her phone half the time. It felt wrong, you know? Like something had shifted, and I couldn't figure out why. I chalked it up to her, maybe just being overprotective of her kid or whatever. But there was this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something was going on that I didn't know about. After that family dinner, things just got weird between Sarah and Lily. Like I mentioned, she started acting all distant and would come up with excuses to keep Lily and her son apart. I couldn't figure out what her deal was, but it was like she was purposely avoiding my daughter. It was subtle at first, but it started happening more and more often, and it wasn't just at family gatherings. It was all the time. At first, I thought maybe I was just overthinking it. You know, maybe Sarah was just being overprotective of her son, or maybe she was tired or stressed out with the whole parenting thing. But then, one day, things came to a head. It was a Saturday, and Sarah showed up at my place out of nowhere. No call, no text, nothing. She just knocked on the door like it was some kind of emergency. I opened the door, and there she was, standing there all serious, holding this folder in her hand like she had something super important to say. I figured it had to do with my brother or their kid, so I let her in, thinking maybe she needed some help or advice. The minute she walked in, I could tell something was off. She wasn't her usual self, and she was kind of fidgeting with the folder in her hands. I asked her what was up, and instead of getting straight to the point, she started pacing around my living room. Like, literally just walking back and forth. I'm standing there in disbelief, and before I can even say anything, she goes, "I did a DNA test on Lily using my son's DNA, and the results show that they're not related." She was looking at me like she expected me to react in some huge way, like she just uncovered some kind of hidden truth or exposed some big lie. I didn't even know how to respond at first. Like, she literally went behind my back, got a DNA test done on my daughter, who isn't even biologically mine, and now she's standing in my living room acting like she's the hero of the story. What was she expecting me to do with this information? Was I supposed to be shocked? Was I supposed to feel embarrassed or ashamed? I mean, it's not like I've ever hidden the fact that Lily's adopted. Everyone in my family knows, including my parents and siblings. I've been completely open about it. But Sarah? She acted like she just blew the lid off some deep, dark secret. And to make it worse, she wasn't done yet. After she told me about the DNA test, she said something that absolutely floored me. She looked at me dead in the eyes and said, "You're raising some dead woman's affair baby." And she said it in front of Lily, who was sitting right there in the other room playing with her toys. I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. First off, who even says something like that? And second, how dare she say something so messed up in front of my daughter? I just stood there staring at her, trying to process the insanity of the situation. And then, before I could stop myself, I started laughing. Like, full-on laughing. It wasn't even that I thought it was funny. It was just the sheer absurdity of it all. Sarah's standing there with her stupid folder of DNA results, looking all self-righteous, and I'm laughing in her face because what else could I do? Once I finally got myself together, I looked at her and said, "I know Lily's not my biological daughter. She's adopted. This thing called adoption exists, and maybe you've heard of it." Her face went beet red. She clearly didn't expect that reaction from me. I think she thought she was going to drop this bombshell, and I'd be all devastated and questioning everything. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, she was the one who ended up looking like a fool, and she knew it. Without saying another word, she grabbed her folder, stormed out of the house, and slammed the door behind her. I was still fuming after she left, but mostly I was just mad that she had the nerve to bring that nonsense up in front of Lily. My daughter didn't deserve to hear any of that, especially not from someone like Sarah. She's 6 years old. She doesn't need to be dealing with any of that kind of drama. After Sarah left, I sat down with Lily and made sure she was okay. Luckily, she didn't seem to have caught on to what Sarah said. I kept it light and just told her that some people don't always understand things the way they should, but that it didn't matter because we were a family no matter what anyone else thought. But I was pissed. And honestly, I was hurt too. How could someone in my own family, someone who's supposed to care about me and my daughter, pull something like this? What did she even think she was accomplishing? I mean, did she really believe I didn't know Lily wasn't biologically mine? Did she think I was raising her by accident or something? Later that night, I called my brother to let him know what happened. I was still heated, but I figured he deserved to know that his fiancée had gone behind my back and done something so insane. But instead of being shocked or angry at her, he tried to defend her. He said she thought she was doing the right thing by getting the test done. He said she was just trying to help. I lost it at that point. How on earth is DNA testing someone else's child without their permission considered helping? I asked him straight up, what was she hoping to accomplish? Did she think I was going to abandon Lily? Was that the plan? He didn't have much to say after that. Just kept saying she didn't mean any harm and that I was overreacting. But how was I supposed to react? Someone tested my daughter without my knowledge, threw the results in my face, and then basically insulted me and Lily in my own home. There's no way I was going to just brush that off. The whole thing felt like a betrayal, not just from Sarah, but from my brother too. The fact that he wasn't even on my side in this just made things worse. I didn't expect him to tear Sarah apart, but at the very least, I thought he'd have my back. Instead, he was making excuses for her behavior, and I wasn't having it. That night, after I calmed down, I sat with Lily again, just to make sure everything was fine. She was totally oblivious to the drama, thank God. And as I watched her playing with her toys, I just kept thinking how lucky I am to have her in my life, no matter what anyone else thinks. So after that whole mess with Sarah pulling the DNA stunt, things felt off. It was like this weird tension that nobody wanted to acknowledge. I hadn't talked to Sarah since she stormed out of my place, and my brother? He wasn't exactly on my side, but we hadn't had a proper conversation about it either. It was just hanging there, like a bad smell nobody was addressing. I figured, whatever. Maybe Sarah would calm down and realize how stupid and messed up what she did was. Maybe she'd apologize, and we could all just move on. But no, that wasn't what happened. A couple of weeks went by, and we were all set to meet up again at my parents' place for another family thing. I wasn't really looking forward to seeing Sarah, to be honest. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. Was she going to pretend like nothing happened? Or worse, was she going to double down on her nonsense? Either way, I was just going to keep my distance and try not to let her ruin the day. So we get there, and things seem okay at first. It was kind of awkward, but nothing out of the ordinary for a family gathering. Sarah was doing her thing, chatting with my mom, playing nice, all that. I was just keeping an eye on Lily, making sure she was having fun, playing with her cousins and whatnot. It was all pretty normal, until, surprise, surprise, Sarah had another trick up her sleeve. At one point, my parents pulled me aside, looking all serious. My mom had that kind of concerned look on her face. You know the one, like she's about to drop something on you, but is trying to be gentle about it. My dad, on the other hand, looked pissed. That's when I knew whatever was coming wasn't going to be good. So, my mom tells me that Sarah had gone to their house a few days earlier. I was like, okay, what for? Thinking maybe it had something to do with my brother or their son. But no. Apparently, Sarah had told my parents that Lily wasn't my biological daughter, like it was some huge revelation. She'd gone over there all proud of herself, thinking she was exposing some big secret, like my parents didn't already know the whole situation. And as if that wasn't bad enough, She didn't stop there. She straight up told them that because Lily wasn't really my daughter, she shouldn't get the same $50,000 college fund that my parents had set up for the grandkids. She had the audacity to suggest that the entire $100,000 should go to her son because, according to her, he was the legitimate grandchild. I was speechless. Like, what the actual hell was wrong with her? Who does something like that? I felt this surge of anger rising up inside me. The fact that she was still trying to pull this crap, even after I'd already told her Lily was adopted, was beyond me. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to go behind my back and try to convince my parents to take away Lily's college fund. But here's the thing. I wasn't even mad about the money. I mean, yeah, that was messed up. But what really got to me was the principle of it. Lily might not be biologically related to me, but she's still my daughter. She's still part of this family. And for Sarah to try and push her out like that, to make it seem like she didn't belong, that was unforgivable. Thankfully, my parents didn't fall for Sarah's crap. My mom, who is normally the most gentle, understanding person in the world, apparently wasn't having any of it. She straight up told Sarah that Lily is their granddaughter, and nothing is going to change that. She said that if Sarah couldn't accept that, then she didn't belong in this family. And my dad, who's not usually one for big confrontations, backed her up. I could tell from the way my parents were telling me the story that they were really upset. My mom even said she kicked Sarah out of the house after she wouldn't drop it. I've never seen her that angry before. But honestly, I was glad they stood up for Lily like that. It meant the world to me that they had her back, that they saw her as part of the family no matter what. I guess Sarah didn't expect things to go that way, because ever since that incident, she's been quiet. I haven't heard a peep from her, and neither has my brother. Speaking of him, he's been keeping a low profile too. I'm guessing he finally had to have a serious conversation with Sarah about all the crap she pulled, but he hasn't said much to me about it. He did text me an apology at one point, but it was kind of vague. Like, sorry about everything that happened, kind of vague. No details, no real acknowledgement of what went down. But at least it was something, I guess. Honestly, I don't even know what their next move is. I'm not expecting an apology from Sarah anytime soon, but at this point, I don't really care. I'm just glad my parents stood their ground and made it clear that Lily is part of the family, no questions asked. Lily, of course, doesn't know anything about this. She's just a kid. She doesn't need to know that someone tried to take away her college fund or push her out of the family. All she needs to know is that she's loved, and that's exactly what I'm going to keep showing her. Every day, I'm going to make sure she feels that love from me, my parents, and everyone else who matters. I'm not sure what the future holds for our relationship with Sarah, but honestly, I'm done stressing about it. If she wants to come around and be part of the family, fine. But if she's going to keep pulling these stunts, I'm not interested. My priority is Lily, and making sure she grows up knowing she's got a family who loves her, no matter what some DNA test says. It's funny, though. You'd think after all this, I'd be more upset, but really, I just feel relieved. Relieved that the people who matter, my parents, Lily, and me, are all on the same page. And as for Sarah, she's the one who ended up looking like a fool. My brother and Sarah didn't reach out, and honestly, I didn't feel like being the one to fix things this time. It felt like the ball was in their court, you know? They were the ones who messed up, and if anyone was going to apologize, it should be them. But here's the thing. Family stuff never just stays quiet forever. It's like there's always something brewing under the surface, just waiting for the next blow-up. I knew eventually something would come up again, and it didn't take long for that to happen. So, it was a random Thursday when my phone buzzed. I checked and saw it was my brother. He hadn't called me in weeks, so right away I knew something was up. I answered, and the first thing he says without any small talk is, "Hey, can we talk?" Now, "Can we talk" is never a good opener, right? That's the kind of line you use when you know the conversation's going to be awkward or heavy. I sighed, mentally preparing myself for whatever was coming, and just said, "Yeah, what's up?" He started off by saying how he felt bad about everything that had gone down. He said he understood why I was pissed, but that Sarah wasn't taking it well, and he wanted to clear the air before things got worse. And of course, he slipped in there that Sarah felt really misunderstood and that she didn't mean any harm. That's when I started getting frustrated. I mean, misunderstood? She literally tried to get my daughter's college fund taken away because she wasn't biologically related to me. That's not being misunderstood. That's just being cruel. But instead of blowing up at him, I kept calm, somehow, and asked, what exactly does she think she was doing that wasn't harmful? There was this pause on the other end. I could hear him breathing, like he was trying to figure out the right words. Finally, he says, she thought she was protecting our family's legacy or some crap like that. He didn't even sound like he believed it himself. He was just repeating whatever Sarah had told him. He kept going, trying to explain how Sarah thought that since the money was coming from our parents, it should only go to their real grandchildren. And that's when I kind of lost it. I didn't yell or anything, but I was firm. I told him straight up, Lily is my daughter, period. If Sarah or anyone else has a problem with that, then they can stay out of my life. I'm not going to let anyone, family or not, make my daughter feel like she doesn't belong. There was another long silence, and then he said something that honestly shocked me. He goes, well, Sarah's not sure she wants to be around Lily anymore. Now, at that point, I had no idea where this conversation was even going. I mean, what was he expecting me to say? Oh, sure, that's fine. Keep your distance from my daughter because she's adopted? No way. I shot back. Then maybe you both need to figure out how important family really is to you, because if Sarah can't accept Lily, then we've got nothing else to talk about. It was quiet again after that. I could tell he wasn't expecting me to draw such a hard line. But honestly, what else was I supposed to do? I wasn't going to let Sarah's messed up views on what family means affect how my daughter feels growing up. That's not negotiable. Eventually, he said he'd talk to Sarah, but he didn't sound very hopeful about it. We ended the call kind of awkwardly, and I didn't feel any better about the situation. In fact, I felt worse. The fact that my brother was even entertaining Sarah's feelings on the whole thing really stung. Like, this is his niece we're talking about, and he's letting his fiancée create this toxic divide. It didn't sit right with me at all. That weekend, I took Lily to my parents' house again. I hadn't told them about the phone call because I didn't want to stir things up if I didn't have to. But while we were there, my mom pulled me aside. She could tell something was bothering me, so I just unloaded the whole story. The DNA test, the college fund drama, and now this latest bit about Sarah not wanting to be around Lily. My mom, bless her heart, was furious. She didn't yell or anything, but you could see it in her face. She just shook her head and said, that girl has no idea what family is. No idea. My dad, on the other hand, was more silent, but I could tell he wasn't happy either. He never liked drama, and this whole situation was becoming one big headache for everyone. We spent the rest of the afternoon hanging out with my parents, and Lily was having a blast, completely oblivious to all the nonsense happening behind the scenes. I kept thinking about what it would mean if things didn't get better. Would I really have to cut ties with my own brother because of Sarah's ridiculous ideas about family? It felt surreal, but at the same time I wasn't willing to compromise when it came to Lily's place in the family. Later that night, after we got home and I put Lily to bed, I got another text from my brother. This one was shorter, just a simple, "We need to talk again soon." I didn't respond right away. I was too tired to deal with it. Honestly, part of me was just exhausted from the whole situation. But I knew it wasn't over, and I knew we were going to have another tough conversation. The next few days, I went over the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what I'd say to my brother when we talked again. I wasn't going to budge on my stance, but I also didn't want to completely blow up the relationship. Family is complicated like that. You want to protect your own, but sometimes the people you're protecting them from are the ones you thought you'd never have to. It felt like I was in this weird limbo, waiting for the next move. And honestly, I was just over it. But I also knew that this wasn't something I could just ignore and hope it went away. Something had to give, and I wasn't going to be the one to let Sarah's toxic mindset win. Final update. So here we are. The big talk finally happened, and honestly, it went about as well as I expected. which is to say, not great. My brother called me up a couple of days after his vague, "We need to talk again soon" text. He sounded tired, like this whole situation was weighing on him too, which made me feel a bit bad. But at the same time, I wasn't going to let that cloud the bigger issue. We met up at a coffee shop, neutral territory. The minute we sat down, I could tell it was going to be one of those conversations where nobody really wins. He started off by saying how sorry he was for how everything had played out. He said he didn't want there to be any bad blood between us, and that family is important to him. But then, of course, he brought up Sarah again. He tried to explain how she was feeling, how she was coming from this place of wanting to protect her family's future, blah, blah, blah. It was the same stuff I'd already heard before. It was. I just sat there, listening, letting him get it all out. But when he was done, I told him straight up, "Look, I get that you're trying to keep the peace, but Sarah crossed a line. There's no justifying what she did. She didn't just hurt me. She disrespected Lily. And if she can't see that, I don't know how we move forward." He didn't argue with me, which was a relief. He just nodded, and then he dropped the question I knew was coming. "So, what now?" And honestly, I didn't know what to say at first. I've never been great at these types of conversations, but I told him the truth. What happens next is up to Sarah. If she's willing to apologize, if she can see how wrong she was, then maybe we can move forward. But if she's going to keep acting like Lily isn't a part of this family, then I don't see how we can keep pretending everything's fine. He sat with that for a minute. I could tell he was struggling, probably because he knew I was right, but also didn't want to admit it. In the end, he didn't make any promises, didn't offer any real solutions. He just said he'd talk to Sarah and we'd go from there. So I guess that's where things stand. I'm not holding my breath for some big resolution anytime soon, but at least I made it clear where I stand. At the end of the day, I'm not going to compromise when it comes to Lily. She's my daughter, and she deserves to be treated like part of the family, no matter what Sarah or anyone else thinks. And if that means things with my brother and Sarah stay awkward for a while, or maybe even forever, then so be it. My priority is making sure Lily knows she's loved, and that nobody, not even someone in the family, can make her feel otherwise.
Adam, a kind-hearted man with an instinct to help, offered shelter to a stranger woman on a rainy night. The next day, a helicopter landed near his house, bringing with it a revelation that left him stunned. Unaware of the woman's true identity, his small act of kindness led to unexpected changes in his life, changes he never could have imagined. Welcome to Unveiled Narratives. I'm excited to share another story with you, one filled with mystery, kindness, and unexpected twists. I hope you enjoy it and keep coming back for more. Adam Thompson drove carefully down the rain-slicked road, the storm raging outside, making visibility nearly impossible. His windshield wipers worked furiously, but the fog and relentless downpour made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. It had been a long day at work, and he was eager to get home to his modest house, where a warm meal and the solitude he'd grown used to awaited him. As he rounded a bend on the desolate road, his headlights caught the figure of someone standing on the roadside. It was a woman, drenched, shivering, and waving desperately for help. Adam slowed to a stop, rolling down his window slightly. "Are you okay?" he called out, raising his voice over the sound of the rain. The woman approached cautiously, her body shivering in rain. "My car broke down a mile back. I need to get to my friend's house for a party, but I can't." Her voice trembled, not just from the cold, but from the growing hopelessness of her situation. Adam looked her over, noticing her soaked clothes and pale face. Without hesitation, he said, "Get in. You'll freeze if you stay out here." She hesitated for only a moment before climbing into the passenger seat. Adam handed her an old towel he kept in the back seat. "Here, dry off as best as you can. The heater's on." "Thank you," she said softly, her gratitude clear. As they drove, the woman introduced herself as Lily. Adam nodded but focused on the road, the storm worsening by the minute. "How far is your friend's house?" he asked, glancing at her. "About an hour from here," she replied. Adam frowned. Between the fog and the storm, the journey was becoming increasingly dangerous. The isolated area meant there were few passing cars, let alone public transport. He sighed. Look, I don't think I can get you there safely tonight. My house is about 10 minutes from here. You can stay there for the night, and in the morning, when the weather clears, I'll take you where you need to go. Lily hesitated, her pride warring with practicality. But as another gust of wind rocked the car, she realized she didn't have much choice. All right, thank you. I promise I won't be any trouble. Don't worry about it, Adam said, giving her a reassuring smile. Adam's home was modest but tidy, reflecting his simple, hard-working lifestyle. He handed Lily an oversized hoodie and sweatpants. These might be a little big on you, but they're warm and dry, he said simply. While Lily went to change, Adam stepped into the kitchen and filled a small pot with water, quickly preparing a simple soup. The rich aroma of chicken broth soon filled the room, offering a sense of comfort against the storm outside. When Lily returned, now bundled in the warm clothes, Adam handed her a steaming mug of soup. Here, this should help, he said. Lily hesitated, her eyes wide with surprise at the thoughtful gestures. You've already done so much. I don't know how to thank you. Adam shrugged, pulling out a chair nearby to sit down. You don't have to thank me. A little kindness can go a long way, and everyone deserves that, especially on a night like this. He paused, glancing toward the window where the rain continued to pour. Dinner won't be fancy, he said as he moved to the kitchen, but it'll be hot. That's more than enough, Lily replied, grateful for the warmth and shelter. Adam busied himself preparing a basic but hearty meal, pasta with a side of garlic bread. As they sat down to eat, Lily noticed a framed photograph of a young woman and a little girl on a nearby shelf. Your family? She asked, gesturing toward the picture. Adam paused, his gaze lingering on the photo. Yeah, my wife and daughter. It's just me now. There was a heaviness in his voice that Lily didn't want to press, but before she could respond, Adam spoke again. You know, tomorrow's my birthday, he said with a small, almost sheepish smile. Not that I'm doing much to celebrate. I've got work, and I've been saving every penny, so no big plans. Really? Lily's eyebrows lifted. That's a bit sad. Adam shrugged. It's life. I'm just grateful to have a job, a roof over my head, and the chance to keep going. Birthdays aren't as big a deal when you're older. He chuckled, trying to brush it off, but Lily caught the wistfulness in his tone. She wanted to say something to lift his spirits, but instead she simply said, Well, happy early birthday, Adam. Thank you for everything tonight. After dinner, as they cleared the table, Lily gestured toward the photo again. If it's okay to ask, what happened to them? Adam hesitated, but the kindness and genuine curiosity in Lily's expression made him feel safe enough to share. Years ago, I made some bad decisions, Adam began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. Drugs took over my life, and I spiraled out of control. I lost my job, my home, and eventually my family. Lily listened intently, her hands clasped around a warm mug of tea. My wife tried to help me for years, Adam continued, his gaze distant. But there's only so much a person can take. When I hit rock bottom, I realized I couldn't keep going like that. I went through rehab, got clean, and decided to start over in a new city. Is that why you moved here? Lily asked softly. Adam nodded. I didn't want reminders of the life I'd messed up. This place gave me a fresh start. I work long hours now, trying to pay off debts I've been carrying for years. It's hard, but it's honest work, and I remind myself every day that I've come a long way from where I used to be. Lily's eyes glistened as she absorbed his words. That's incredible, Adam. You've turned your life around in a way most people can't. You should be proud of yourself. Adam smiled faintly. Thanks. Some days it's hard to see it that way, but I try to hold on to hope. You never know when life might surprise you. Lily tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. That's true. Sometimes things can change when you least expect it. Adam nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. You should get some rest. It's been a long day, and I've got an early start myself. Adam showed Lily to the guest room, offering her extra blankets and making sure she was comfortable. "If you need anything, just knock," he said before retreating to his own room. Lily lay awake for a while, reflecting on Adam's story. Despite his struggles, he remained kind and selfless, a rare quality in her experience. She made a mental note to do something, to show her gratitude, though she wasn't sure how yet. Adam, too, lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted to the coming day. It wasn't just another birthday. It was a reminder of how far he'd come, even if the journey ahead still seemed daunting. The next morning, Adam woke early, just as he had planned. The stillness of the house was peaceful, a contrast to the chaos of the storm the night before. He brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen, and was about to prepare some breakfast when he heard a low hum in the distance. At first, he thought it was the storm subsiding, but the sound grew louder and more distinct. Stepping outside, Adam froze in disbelief. A sleek black helicopter was descending toward the open field near his house. Moments later, a black SUV rolled up the gravel driveway, its tires crunching over the ground. The SUV came to a stop, and two sharply dressed individuals stepped out. They moved with purpose, their demeanor serious yet calm. One of them, a tall man with a commanding presence, approached Adam, holding up a photo of Lily. "Good morning," the man said politely. "We've been tracking this young woman's location since last night, and it led us here. Is she inside?" Adam blinked, confusion washing over him. Yeah, she's inside. What's going on?" The man tucked the photo back into his coat pocket. "I'm James, Mr. Jonathan Bennett's assistant. Lily Bennett is his daughter." Adam's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, she's who?" Before James could respond, the door to the house opened, and Lily stepped outside. She was dressed in the dry clothes Adam had lent her, looking a little startled, but quickly composing herself. "Lily," James said with a respectful nod, "your father's been trying to reach you all night. Your phone must have been out of service." Lily sighed, offering a small apologetic smile. "I'm fine, James. I just had some car trouble and was lucky enough to find someone kind enough to help me." She gestured toward Adam. James's gaze flickered to Adam. "I see. Mr. Bennett will want to meet him then." Lily turned to Adam, her eyes softening with gratitude. "Adam, this is James. He's my father's assistant. I didn't expect all of this, but I guess he's worried." Adam still wasn't sure what to make of the situation, but Lily's reassurance helped him find some footing. The helicopter ride was silent except for the occasional hum of the blades cutting through the sky. They landed smoothly in the estate's expansive yard, and as they stepped out, Adam found himself awestruck by the sheer scale of the place. A tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes stood waiting on the steps. This, Adam assumed, was Jonathan Bennett. "Mr. Thompson, it's a pleasure to meet you," Jonathan greeted him, his voice deep and calm. He extended a hand which Adam shook firmly. Lily stood beside them, smiling warmly. "Dad, this is Adam. He's the one who helped me last night." Jonathan's expression softened with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough, Mr. Thompson. You've not only kept my daughter safe, but you've shown a rare kind of kindness in a world that doesn't always have much of it." Adam was taken aback by the sincerity in Jonathan's words. He had done nothing extraordinary. He had just acted on instinct. But the weight of Jonathan's words made him feel like something more. "I just did what anyone would do," Adam said, his voice steady but his nerves still evident. Jonathan smiled, though there was a glint of something deeper in his eyes. "Still, I insist. Please, let me offer you something." He pulled a thick envelope from inside his jacket and handed it to Adam. "It's not much, but I want you to have this. Consider it a token of my appreciation." Adam hesitated, his fingers lingering on the envelope. "I didn't do it for money," he said. "I'm just glad she's safe. That's reward enough." Jonathan paused, then nodded as if understanding something deeper about Adam. "I respect that, but please accept this. You've helped more than you know." Adam shook his head politely, unable to accept. "Thank you, but I couldn't." "All right, Mr. Thompson," Jonathan said with a smile. Then at least allow us the pleasure of having you join us for breakfast. They sat at the grand breakfast table, where a spread of fresh fruits, eggs, and tea awaited them. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, and the conversation flowed effortlessly. "So, tell me about yourself, Mr. Thompson," Jonathan asked, his tone relaxed now. "I'm curious to know more about the man who helped my daughter." Adam hesitated, but shared a little about his background. He talked about his struggles with addiction, the long road to recovery, and the hard work he had put into rebuilding his life. Jonathan listened intently, nodding occasionally, while Lily seemed intrigued, her gaze never leaving Adam as she processed his words. "You've come a long way," Jonathan remarked thoughtfully. "It takes a lot of strength to make it through what you've gone through." Adam smiled faintly. "It hasn't been easy, but I'm getting there." As breakfast came to a close, Jonathan's expression softened. "You're welcome to stay here for as long as you like. You've done something rare today, Adam. If there's ever anything I can do for you, just ask." After leaving the Bennett estate, Adam returned to his home by helicopter, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what to think of everything that had happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in his life. Later that day, after returning to work, Adam received a call from his bank. The news left him stunned. His entire debt had been cleared, and an additional amount, equivalent to more than a year's salary, had been credited to his account. The bank representative explained it was an anonymous transaction, leaving no clue as to who had made such a generous act. Adam sat in silence, his phone still in his hand, his heart pounding. The amount was more than enough to change his life. He knew deep down that it was Lily and her father who had done this. The gesture, both generous and mysterious, left him overwhelmed. A small act of compassion on a stormy night had returned to him in a way he could never have imagined. Later that evening, after a long day at work, Adam returned home, still processing the events of the day. As he drove up to his house, he was stunned to see lights twinkling in his yard. His heart skipped a beat as he pulled into the driveway and saw that his front yard had been transformed. There, in the middle of the yard, was a beautifully decorated table with a large birthday cake. Balloons fluttered in the breeze, and festive decorations brightened the space. Standing by the table were Lily and Jonathan. "Adam!" Lily called out, her voice warm with excitement. "Happy birthday!" Adam stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the gesture. The kindness, the thoughtfulness, it was more than he had ever expected. Jonathan stepped forward, shaking Aaron's hand firmly. "I know it's not much, but we wanted to do something for you. You've done more for us than you know." Tears welled in Adam's eyes as he looked at the birthday cake. He hadn't expected any of this, especially not after all the struggles he had faced. The weight of the past few days hit him all at once. Lily smiled gently. "You deserve this, Adam. We're glad to have you in our lives." As they celebrated together, Adam felt a warmth that went beyond the birthday cake and the decorations. It was the warmth of true kindness, of people who cared, and for the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen. If this story inspired you, help us share more meaningful tales by hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to bring more powerful stories to life. Join our growing community and be part of something truly impactful.
We were funding my husband's nephew's college, but after he called me a slut, we cut him off. I'm 39F. Been married to Jake, 42M, for over 15 years now. For the most part, our marriage has been great. We don't have a lot of issues, no huge fights or anything, except for one big thing that hit us a few years ago: infertility. I never really talked about it much, but we both really wanted kids. Like, we tried everything: doctors, treatments, the whole deal, but nothing worked out for us. Adoption was something we considered, but it's a huge process where we live. You'd think it'd be easier to help a kid in need, right? But it's not. Plus, with both Jake and me working full-time, it felt impossible to give a kid the attention they'd deserve. We didn't want to be those parents who adopt and then don't have time for the child, so we decided to put that plan on hold. Around that time, we had this idea. Since we couldn't have kids of our own, we figured we'd help out family instead. Jake's sister, Karen, 44F, was really struggling. She's a single mom with 3 kids, and her ex-husband Frank was a real piece of work. Total deadbeat, alcoholic, barely paid child support. Karen was doing her best, working 2 jobs just to get by, but it was clear she was drowning. Her kids, Lily, 23F, Max, 20M, and Lucas, 17M, were good kids, but it was obvious Karen couldn't afford their education. So, being the nice people we are, Jake and I decided we'd help pay for the kids' schooling. It felt like the right thing to do. We didn't want Karen or the kids to feel like they had no options, and we had enough savings to cover tuition. Plus, it's family, you know? You help out when you can. At first, everything seemed fine. Karen was super grateful, and her kids were respectful, at least back then. Lily, the oldest, was always a star student. She graduated college, got a great job, and was making something of herself. She thanked us all the time for what we did, even though she probably could have figured it out on her own. But we were happy to help. Max and Lucas were younger, still in high school, and at the time, they seemed like good kids too. They were doing fine in school, and everything felt like it was working out. We were helping out, the kids were doing well, and Karen wasn't as stressed out. Win-win, right? Well, things started to go south the moment Max finished high school. That's when I started noticing this shift in how he acted. He graduated, and we asked him, like we did with Lily, what his plans were for college. Instead of being excited or even appreciative, Max hit us with this: "I don't want to go to college. Just give me the money instead." I remember Jake and I just staring at him, confused. Like what? College money isn't pocket change you can just spend on whatever. So Jake asked him, "What do you want the money for?" And Max casually says he wants to start a business. He said it like we should have known already. Now, don't get me wrong, starting a business isn't a bad idea if you've got a plan, but Max didn't have one. He had no idea what kind of business he wanted to start, no clue about anything, really. He just said, "I'll figure it out." Like that was enough for us to hand over thousands of dollars. Jake pressed him a bit more, asked, "Okay, what's the business idea?" And all Max could say was, "Something online." That was it. No details, no strategy, no nothing, just something online. It felt like he thought we were stupid or something. We didn't say no right away, but we told him we needed time to think it over. Max just shrugged and said, "Cool," and left it at that. But that wasn't the end of it. A couple of weeks later, Max starts following up with us, like it's our responsibility to give him this money. He's texting Jake all the time, asking if we've made a decision. It felt like he was acting as if we owed him this money, which made 0 sense to me. Jake and I sat down, talked it over, and decided there was no way we were giving him the money for this half-baked idea. Max had no business experience, no plan, and honestly, no respect for the fact that we were even considering helping him. We didn't want to set him up to fail by throwing money at something that wasn't going to work. When Jake told him our decision, Max completely flipped out. And here's the kicker. He didn't throw a tantrum at us. Oh no, that would have been too easy. Instead, he ran to Karen and Linda, Jake's mom, and started complaining that we weren't supporting him. He made it sound like we were being unreasonable, like we'd promised him this money and we're now going back on our word. Then Karen gets involved, and now we've got the whole family breathing down our necks. Karen's telling us that we need to support Max's dreams, and Linda's saying we're not keeping our promise to help with the kids' education. Jake shut that down real fast, telling them both that we weren't giving Max the money because he had no plan. He made it clear we'd happily pay for Max's college tuition if he ever decided to go back to school, but we weren't funding some mystery business that didn't exist. Karen and Linda tried to guilt us into it, but we held firm. After a few rounds of back and forth, things went quiet. For a while, I thought maybe that was the end of it. Karen mentioned something about selling some family heirlooms to give Max the money, which sounded like a terrible idea, but we stayed out of it. Whatever she wanted to do was her business. Then, surprise, surprise, Max's business never happened. All that talk. And it didn't go anywhere. No shock there. But here's where things get really awkward. After Max's business idea flopped, he came crawling back acting like nothing happened. He told us he was ready to go to college now and asked if we'd cover his tuition. And you know what? We did. We're suckers, I guess. But something was off. Even though we were paying for his education like we promised, Max's attitude toward us changed. He went from being friendly and talkative to giving us the cold shoulder. It was like, all of a sudden, we weren't good enough for him. He'd barely talk to us at family gatherings, and when he did, it was short, one-word answers. No thanks. No appreciation. Just silence. That's when I realized that maybe this whole thing was a mistake. Helping Karen and her kids was supposed to be a good thing, but now it felt like we were dealing with a couple of entitled brats who didn't give a damn about anything but the money. And that's just the start of where things went wrong. But I'll get to the rest later. So after all that back and forth with Max's failed business idea, Things were awkward, but we thought we'd moved past it. He was back in college, and we were paying for his tuition just like we said we would. But then Karen invited us to dinner for Lucas's 17th birthday, and let me tell you, that's when everything went downhill. Fast. Now, going into this dinner, I wasn't exactly thrilled. Things had been tense ever since Max pulled that stunt with the business, but Jake thought it'd be a good idea for us to go and try to keep the peace. You know, family and all that. So I agreed. But I had this feeling in the pit of my stomach that something was off. I just didn't know how bad it was going to get. We get to Karen's house, and at first, everything seems pretty normal. The kids are there, Karen's there, and Linda, Jake's mom, is there too, of course. We sit down for dinner, and right away I can tell something's different with Max. He's always been kind of distant since the whole business blow-up, but this time he's barely talking to us. Just quick answers, no real conversation, and he's not making any eye contact. I try to ignore it and focus on Lucas's birthday. It's his day, after all, and I don't want to make it about the awkwardness between us and Max. But then, about halfway through the dinner, Lucas suddenly drops a bomb on me. Out of nowhere, he looks straight at me and says, "How could Jake even find you attractive? You're so old and ugly." I froze. I literally didn't know what to say. I mean, what do you even say to something like that? I could feel the blood drain from my face, and I just sat there, staring at him, trying to process if I actually heard that right. It felt like time stopped for a second. Like, did this 17-year-old kid really just insult me like that at his own birthday dinner? Before I could even react, Jake was already on his feet. He snapped. He's usually pretty calm, but this time he was furious. He turned to Lucas and said, "What the hell did you just say?" The whole table went dead silent. And you know what the worst part was? Karen, Max, and Linda, they were all laughing. Like Lucas had just made the funniest joke in the world. They didn't seem to care that I was sitting there, totally humiliated, trying to figure out what I did to deserve that kind of insult. Jake wasn't having any of it. He turned to Lucas and said, "Apologize, right now." But Lucas just smirked and said, "What? It was just a joke." That's when I lost it. I could feel my face burning with embarrassment and anger. It wasn't just a joke, and he knew it. They all knew it. I turned to Karen, hoping she'd step in and tell her son to knock it off. But instead she just shrugged and said, "Come on, it's his birthday. Don't ruin the night over something so small. He's just a kid." Just a kid? Are you kidding me? He's 17, not 7. He knew exactly what he was doing, and the fact that she was brushing it off like it was no big deal? I couldn't believe it. Jake was livid. He told Lucas again, "Apologize or we're leaving." Lucas just sat there, grinning like he'd won something, and Karen? She just sat there too, like this was all totally fine. Linda, of course, chimed in with her usual "people can have opinions," as if calling me ugly at a family dinner was some kind of valid criticism. That was it. Jake stood up, grabbed my hand, and said, "We're leaving. This conversation isn't going anywhere until you all apologize to her." As we were standing to leave, Linda grabbed my arm and tried to pull me back into my chair. "Come on, it's his birthday. Don't make a big deal out of this. He didn't mean anything by it," she said, as if I was the one making things awkward. She actually had the nerve to tell me that I should know how to handle criticism from kids. I yanked my arm away from her and said, "He's not a kid, and even if he was, it's your job to teach him some damn manners." And here's the kicker. While all this was going on, I could see Lucas and Max sitting there, smirking like this whole thing was some kind of game to them. They thought it was funny, like they'd accomplished exactly what they set out to do, make me feel like crap. I stared at them both and said, "It's not funny. You guys are mean, and one day you're going to pay for treating people like this." Then I walked out before anyone could say anything else. Jake followed right behind me, fuming. As we got in the car, I could feel the anger bubbling up inside of me. I was shaking. Not because of what Lucas had said, but because of how everyone else acted like it wasn't a big deal. Like it was my problem for being upset. Like I was the one overreacting. We drove home in silence, but I could tell Jake was just as furious as I was. When we got home, we didn't even talk about it. We both just needed to cool down and process what had happened. But it didn't stop there. A week later, Karen and Linda showed up at our house, unannounced, trying to apologize. I'll save the details of that disaster for later, but let's just say it was one of the fakest apologies I've ever heard. And you know what? Lucas never apologized. Not once. The whole thing was a wake-up call for me. I realized that no matter how much we helped Karen and her kids, no matter how much we gave, it didn't matter. They didn't respect us. They didn't care about us. And that was the moment I knew things were never going to be the same again. So, after that whole disaster at Lucas's birthday dinner, Jake and I decided to keep our distance from Karen and the rest of them. Honestly, we were done. You can only take so much disrespect before you just stop caring. But of course, it didn't take long for them to come crawling back, and surprise, surprise, they didn't come back with any real apologies. No, they came back because they wanted something from us. It had been maybe a week since the dinner incident when I came home one afternoon to find Karen and Linda standing in our living room, arguing with Jake. I hadn't even made it all the way inside the house before I knew this was going to be bad. They were going at it. Karen trying to talk Jake into something, Linda standing there with that usual look on her face like she was trying to play peacemaker, but also clearly on Karen's side. I walked in, acting like I didn't even see them, and went straight to our bedroom. I was done with all of it. I didn't want to hear whatever excuses or nonsense they were about to throw at us, and I definitely didn't want to listen to Karen's fake apologies. But of course, Karen couldn't just let it go. She followed me to the bedroom, knocking on the door like she was going to solve everything with a little chat. She comes in with Linda, and they both start with the same tired lines. "We're so sorry about what happened. We talked to Lucas. He feels terrible about it, blah, blah, blah." I didn't believe a word of it. So I just said, "Okay, where is Lucas then? If he's so sorry, why isn't he here apologizing himself?" Karen stumbles over her words for a minute and finally says something like, "He's too embarrassed to face you, but we're here to apologize on his behalf." Yeah, right. Lucas wasn't embarrassed. He was too full of himself to care. They were only there because they needed money again. And it wasn't long before the real reason for their visit came out. After a few minutes of awkward fake apologies, Karen finally says, "Rustin's getting ready to graduate high school, and he wants to go to college, and, well, we're hoping you guys will help out with tuition like you did with Lily." I just sat there staring at them, wondering if they even realized what they were asking. After everything that had happened, after the way their kids had treated me, they were really standing there, asking for money like nothing had happened. No real apology, no accountability, just straight to asking for favors. I looked at Jake, waiting for him to say something, but he just stood there, arms crossed, fuming. So I finally said, "We're not paying for anything until Lucas apologizes, and not through you. He needs to come here and say it to my face. Until that happens, don't ask us for anything." Karen and Linda looked stunned, like they couldn't believe I'd said that. Karen immediately tried to backpedal, saying that Rustin shouldn't be punished for what Lucas did, that he was just a kid and didn't deserve to miss out on college because of his brother's mistake. But here's the thing. Rustin wasn't exactly innocent either. Sure, he didn't call me ugly like Lucas did, but he'd been sitting there laughing along with him. He didn't step in and say it was wrong, didn't stand up for me or Jake. He was just as bad, in my opinion. So I wasn't feeling too sorry for him at that moment. Jake finally chimed in, telling Karen and Linda, "Look, we've done a lot for you and your kids, but respect goes both ways, and we're not giving you a single cent until your sons grow up and learn some respect." You could tell that's not what they wanted to hear. Karen started to cry, like full-on tears, saying she didn't know what else to do, that she was struggling and needed our help. She even tried to say that we were being unfair, punishing the whole family over a small mistake. That's when I snapped. A small mistake? Calling me ugly and laughing about it isn't a small mistake. That's disrespectful and hurtful, and the fact that you're standing here trying to defend it makes it even worse. If you want our help, then your kids need to learn that actions have consequences. Linda stepped in at that point, trying to calm things down, saying that we shouldn't let this one incident ruin the relationship. She did the whole "we're family" speech, telling us that we should forgive and move on because that's what family does. But honestly, I was over it. I was done being the bigger person, done being the one who always forgave and moved on while they continued to take advantage of us. So I told them, "No. Until your sons show some real remorse and respect, we're not paying for anything. You need to figure this out on your own." The conversation went in circles for a while longer, with Karen and Linda trying every angle to get us to change our minds. But Jake and I stood firm. We weren't going to let them guilt us into giving them money. We'd been more than generous with them for years, and this was the thanks we got. It wasn't happening anymore. Eventually they left, Karen still crying and Linda looking pissed off. Jake and I sat there in silence for a while after they were gone, just trying to process what had just happened. It felt like we'd crossed some kind of line, like things would never go back to the way they were before. And honestly, I was okay with that. At that moment, I realized that we'd spent too long trying to make everyone else happy, trying to be the good family members, always there to help out. But none of that mattered if we weren't respected. Karen, Lucas, Max, they didn't appreciate anything we'd done for them. They just expected it. They acted like we owed them something, like they were entitled to our help. But that day, we made it clear. Respect is earned, not given, and we weren't going to support people who didn't show us any. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about making them happy. I was focused on what was right for us, and that felt pretty damn good. So after Karen and Linda showed up at our place begging for money and offering their half-assed apologies, things went quiet for a bit. Jake and I were sticking to our guns. We weren't going to budge until we got a real apology from Lucas, and we weren't going to keep throwing money at people who couldn't show us basic respect. It felt good to stand firm, but I knew it was only a matter of time before we heard from them again. Fast forward a couple of months, and we get an email from Max. Not a call, not a visit, an email. And what does this email say? It's basically a demand for us to pay for Lucas's college tuition. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a link to the tuition payment page, like we were some sort of ATM. I was honestly shocked at the audacity. After everything that happened, after the way we were treated, they really thought they could just email us and we'd hand over the money? No explanation, no, hey, sorry for the way things went down. Just a cold, businesslike email. Jake and I didn't even bother replying. We just let it sit there in our inbox. Ignored. We figured if they want something from us, the least they could do is make the effort to talk to us like human beings. But then, 2 weeks later, Jake gets a phone call from his mom, Linda. And of course, she's calling to tell him that Max had been waiting on the payment for Lucas's tuition, and she asked if maybe Jake had missed the email. Jake? He wasn't having any of it. He straight up told her, Max who? I don't know him. Linda went silent for a second, probably trying to figure out if Jake was joking or serious. And then she starts in with her usual crap. Oh, come on, you can't still be holding a grudge over something so small. Lucas didn't mean it. Your wife probably misunderstood what he said. Jake just sighed and said, Enough, Mom, we're done. We're cutting them off and we're not paying for anything. If they can't respect us, then they're on their own. Now, you'd think that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. Within minutes, Karen was blowing up Jake's phone, texting him apology after apology. She was clearly in panic mode, saying how she'd make the boys apologize, and how they couldn't afford to lose our support. It was all pretty pathetic, honestly. If they were really sorry, they would have apologized a long time ago, without having to be threatened with losing our money. Jake didn't respond to any of her texts. He wasn't interested in half-hearted apologies that were only coming because they needed something from us, and I was completely on board with that. We'd been more than generous for years, and all we'd gotten in return was disrespect. The next day, I came home to find Karen and Linda standing outside our house, waiting for us. They didn't even bother calling ahead, just showed up like we were supposed to drop everything and deal with them. I could already feel my blood boiling before I even got out of the car. Jake and I walked up to the door, and before I could even put the key in the lock, Karen launched into this whole speech about how sorry they were and how they couldn't survive without our help. She was crying, of course, because that's her go-to move when she doesn't get what she wants. Jake didn't let her get far. He cut her off and said, We're not doing this. We don't welcome people who disrespect us into our home, and we're not going to support people who don't appreciate what we've done for them. You should have come to us with an apology a long time ago, not just because you need money now. Karen was desperate. She started pleading, saying that she and the boys were really sorry and just wanted another chance. But Jake wasn't buying it. He asked her, If the boys are so sorry, why aren't they here with you right now? Why didn't they come to apologize themselves? Karen froze for a second, and that's when Linda stepped in, trying to smooth things over like she always does. You know how kids are, she said. They're young and hormonal, and they don't always think about the consequences of their actions. But we, as adults, should know better. We shouldn't let this one mistake ruin their future. And that's when I lost it. I wasn't going to let her keep making excuses for those entitled brats. Calling me ugly and laughing about it isn't some teenage mistake, I told her. That's pure disrespect, and the fact that you're standing here defending them instead of holding them accountable just shows why they act the way they do. They've never had to face any real consequences for their behavior because you've always covered for them. I could see the look on Karen's face, and I knew she wasn't expecting me to come at her like that, but I wasn't done. I feel sorry for your boys, I told her, because they're going to have a hard time in life if they don't learn some basic respect. And that's on you, Karen. You've let them grow up thinking they can treat people however they want and still get whatever they ask for. That's not how the world works. The whole time, Linda just stood there, looking like she wanted to say something but didn't know what. Karen, on the other hand, was starting to get defensive, like she was about to argue back, but Jake stepped in before she could. "We've given you plenty of chances," he said, "but this is it. We're done. Don't ask us for anything else." Karen started crying again, trying to play the victim, but neither of us were falling for it. Jake just opened the door and said, "It's time for you to go." They left after that, and honestly, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. For years, we'd bent over backward to help Karen and her kids. And for what? Nothing but entitlement and disrespect. I knew we'd made the right choice. We were done being taken advantage of. And from that point on, we were cutting them off completely. No more money, no more help. They were on their own, and if that meant they had to struggle a little to learn some lessons, then so be it. Update 1. After we told Karen and Linda to leave and made it clear that we were cutting them off, I thought we might finally get some peace. But that's not how things go with people like them, I guess. If you're thinking they left us alone after that, you'd be wrong. It didn't take long for them to come back around, trying different ways to guilt us into giving them what they wanted. This time, though, we didn't cave. We were done. So a few weeks after the big confrontation at our house, Jake and I got invited to a family event. Jake's grandfather was turning 75, and the whole family was going to be there to celebrate. We weren't sure if we wanted to go. The idea of spending a day surrounded by Karen, Max, and Lucas didn't exactly thrill me, but Jake's grandpa had always been good to us, and we didn't want to miss his big day because of the drama. So, we decided to go. When we got there, everything seemed fine at first. People were mingling, laughing, and catching up. Grandpa was in a good mood, and it looked like the day was going to go smoothly. We'd managed to avoid Karen and her boys so far, which was already a win in my book. But of course, that wasn't going to last. I should have known better. I was standing with Jake, talking to his cousin when I noticed Lucas and Max watching me from across the room. They weren't even trying to hide it, just standing there, staring at me like I was some sort of joke. I ignored them at first, trying not to let it ruin my mood, but I could feel their eyes on me the entire time. Every time I glanced their way, they were whispering to each other, smirking, like they were up to something. Now, I'm not the type of person who lets things slide easily, but it was Grandpa's day, and I didn't want to cause a scene. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe they weren't even talking about me, and I was just being paranoid. But that feeling in my gut was telling me I wasn't wrong. Then, during the toast, Jake's dad was giving this heartfelt speech about family and how much Grandpa meant to all of us. I caught Lucas staring right at me, whispering something to Max. Max laughed, and I could see them both looking down at my dress, grinning like idiots. It was disgusting. These kids were half my age, and they were acting like creeps, checking me out and making jokes like they were in some kind of middle school locker room. At that moment, I decided I wasn't going to just sit there and take it. Enough was enough. I'd been quiet too many times, let too many things slide, and I wasn't about to let them keep disrespecting me like that, especially not in front of Jake's entire family. So, after the toast, I walked straight over to them. They were still smirking and whispering when I got there, and as soon as they saw me coming, their faces changed. They clearly didn't expect me to confront them. "What's so funny?" I asked, crossing my arms and staring them down. They both looked at each other, then back at me, playing dumb like they had no idea what I was talking about. "What? We weren't talking about you," Max said, trying to act all innocent. "Yeah, we were just joking around," Lucas added. But I could tell by the look on his face he was lying. I wasn't buying any of it. "You think I'm stupid? You've been staring at me all day, laughing and making comments. If you've got something to say it to my face." For a second, they both just stood there, frozen. Lucas looked like he was going to say something, but then Max, who I guess thought he was being clever, muttered under his breath, "What a slut," and they both started laughing. That's when I lost it. I stepped forward, getting right in Max's face, and I wasn't about to let him get away with it this time. "What did you just say?" I snapped. Max went pale, clearly not expecting me to call him out. He mumbled something about it being a joke, but I wasn't letting him off the hook. "You think it's funny to talk about people like that? You think it's okay to treat me this way? After everything Jake and I have done for your family, this is how you repay us?" Lucas started to backpedal, apologizing, saying they didn't mean anything by it, but it was too late. I wasn't interested in their half-hearted excuses. Jake must have noticed something was going on, because before I knew it, he was standing next to me, asking what happened. I told him everything, right there in front of them, and Jake? He was livid. He turned to Max and Lucas and said, "If you don't apologize right now, you're both done. You'll never get anything from us again." But even then, Max just stood there, refusing to say sorry. Lucas at least had the decency to look ashamed and mutter some weak apology, but Max, he didn't care. He just stood there, arms crossed, daring us to do something about it. Jake shook his head and turned to walk away, and I followed, but not before making it clear to both of them. You think you're untouchable? You're not. You're going to learn the hard way that people don't just take your crap forever. We left them standing there, looking dumbfounded, and I could feel the tension in the room. People had definitely noticed something was going on, but I didn't care anymore. I was done keeping up appearances for the sake of family. If they wanted to act like jerks, they were going to face the consequences. The rest of the day was awkward, to say the least. Karen gave me some weird looks, probably knowing something had gone down, but not daring to say anything. Linda avoided us altogether, which was just fine by me. Jake and I spent most of the day keeping to ourselves, but we made sure to stay until the end for Grandpa's sake. We weren't going to let those kids ruin the day for him. As soon as we got home, I knew things were never going to be the same again. We'd drawn a line in the sand, and they'd crossed it. From that moment on, we were done with them, for good this time. Update 2. After that disaster of a family event, Jake and I knew we were done with Karen, Max, Lucas, and pretty much anyone who thought we'd just keep putting up with their crap. But of course, they didn't make it easy to cut ties. Karen and Linda kept trying to contact us, as if they could somehow undo all the disrespect with a few fake apologies. One day, about a week after the family event, I was at home, minding my own business, when my phone started blowing up with texts. First, it was Linda, then Karen. They both sent long messages practically begging us to let bygones be bygones and move past this. I didn't even have to read the whole thing to know what it was. More guilt trips, more attempts to make us feel bad for not being forgiving enough. I didn't respond. Neither did Jake. We weren't about to fall into that trap again. We'd already made our decision, and we weren't going to let them weasel their way back into our lives just because they needed something from us. Then a couple of days later, Karen showed up at Jake's work. She didn't text, didn't call, just showed up like that would somehow fix everything. She sat in the lobby for over an hour, waiting for Jake to come out and talk to her. But when Jake found out she was there, he didn't even bother going down. He told the receptionist to let her know he was busy and couldn't see her. Karen left after a while, probably realizing her guilt trip tactic wasn't going to work this time. But that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I got a message from Lily, Karen's oldest daughter. Now, Lily was always the one we actually liked. She was respectful, she worked hard, and she didn't seem to have that same entitled attitude that Max and Lucas had. She had moved away for work and was doing great, so we didn't expect to hear from her in the middle of all this drama. Her message was short, but straight to the point. She apologized for how her family had treated us and told me she completely understood why we'd cut them off. She even said she'd had her own issues with Karen and the boys lately, and that she wasn't surprised things had blown up like they had. Lily didn't try to guilt me, didn't ask for anything. She just said she hoped we were doing okay and wanted us to know that she was on our side. I'll be honest, that message meant a lot. It reminded me that not everyone in that family was a lost cause. Lily was proof that you could grow up in the same environment and still turn out to be a decent person. We responded to her, thanked her for her kind words, and let her know we appreciated her reaching out. It was a small moment of peace in all the chaos, and honestly, it made me feel better about the whole situation. It reminded me that Jake and I had made the right decision by cutting off the people who didn't deserve our kindness, and from that point on, we stayed firm. No contact, no more chances. We were finally free of their drama, and honestly, it felt like a weight had been lifted off our shoulders. I pay rent for my parents. Since I was 16 and now I'm finishing college, but parents demand I do this. So here's the deal. I've been living at home while I'm in university and I'm almost done now, just a few months to go before graduation. Honestly, I can't wait to be done. Not just because of school, but because of my living situation. See, my parents have been charging me rent since I was 16. Yeah, I know, it sounds weird, right? It all started when I got my first real job. Well, technically, it's my own business. I started a small company when I was like 15, mostly because I was super into tech stuff, and it kind of blew up. I'm making around $60K a year now, which I thought was great. And I guess my parents thought so too, because the moment they found out I was making adult money, they decided I could handle adult responsibilities. That meant rent. At first, I didn't even question it. I thought, hey, I'm making good money, and $300 a month isn't bad, plus it's my parents, so maybe this is like their way of teaching me responsibility or something. I was cool with it. I mean, I had my own space, my own schedule, and I was mostly independent, but looking back, that was where everything started going wrong. You know how when you're a teenager, you still kind of expect your parents to be your parents. Like, sure, I was paying rent, but I still thought they'd, treat me like their kid. But the moment that rent started, everything changed. They acted like I was just another tenant in their house. Like, my room? That wasn't my room anymore. It was the room I rented. They'd walk in whenever they wanted, no knocking, no warning. I'd be in the middle of something, and boom, they'd barge in like they owned the place, which technically they did. But come on, some basic respect would have been nice. I started setting up boundaries. I cleaned my room when I wanted to, not when they told me to. I did my own laundry, bought my own groceries, cooked my own meals. I figured if I was paying rent, I might as well live how I wanted, right? But of course, that didn't sit well with them. They'd make these snide comments about how I was separating myself from the family. Like, seriously? I'm paying you rent and you're acting like I owe you even more? Things really started getting bad when they realized I wasn't going to just play along with their whole, we're still your parents and we can control everything you do thing. It was like they wanted me to be independent and dependent at the same time. They wanted the rent money, but they didn't want me to act like someone who pays rent. I remember one time I was doing laundry at like 10 p.m. Not even late, right? But my mom comes storming into the laundry room and starts lecturing me about how I'm disturbing the family schedule. I'm standing there holding a basket of socks thinking, what family schedule? I literally buy my own food and eat on my own schedule. What does my laundry have to do with you? But she didn't care. She was just mad that I wasn't doing things on her time. And don't even get me started on the whole family meals thing. They'd always plan these dinners, but half the time they wouldn't even tell me. So I'd be in my room doing homework or working on my business, and my dad would randomly knock, if I was lucky, and tell me dinner's ready. Like, cool, but I didn't even know we were having dinner together. Then they'd guilt trip me for not spending time with them. It got to the point where I just started making my own meals. I figured if I'm already living like I'm on my own, I might as well go all the way. But the real kicker, sorry, I know you said no kicker, but I'm going to use it here, was spring break. So this year, for spring break, I planned a trip to Mexico with some friends. It was my last spring break in university, and I wanted to do something fun before the stress of graduation and my new job hit. I didn't think it was a big deal. I mean, I'm 21, I'm paying rent, and I'm responsible for myself, right? Wrong. Apparently, my parents had this whole big family gathering planned for the exact same week, but they never told me. Like, I literally had no idea this was happening. So I get back from Mexico, all sunburnt and exhausted, and they sit me down like I'm about to get grounded. They were so mad that I wasn't there for the family thing. My dad's going on about how I disrespected the family by choosing my friends over them. I was sitting there like, what? You didn't even tell me this was happening. How's this my fault? Then my mom hit me with the big one. You're grounded. I swear I almost laughed out loud. Grounded? I'm 21, I pay you rent, and you're grounding me? What is this, high school? I just stood up, walked to my room, and locked the door. I could hear them yelling outside, banging on the door, but I wasn't having it. They actually thought they could ground me like I'm still some teenager under their thumb. I stayed in my room the whole night, ignoring them. They kept banging, saying I was being disrespectful. But what did they expect? I wasn't about to let them treat me like a kid while also demanding I pay rent. It's one or the other. You can't have both. The next day, things were tense. My parents barely spoke to me, which was fine by me. I started realizing that they didn't really want me to be independent. They wanted control. They wanted to keep me under their roof so they could keep calling the shots, all while taking my money. It was starting to feel more like I was renting from a couple of really controlling landlords than living with my parents. And honestly, I was done. I started thinking about leaving for good, but I wasn't sure if it was the right move yet. I had a few months left until graduation, and I didn't want to make things harder than they had to be. But at the same time, I couldn't stay in a place where I was constantly being treated like a second-class citizen in my own home. Something had to change, and soon. So, after that whole grounding thing, things just went downhill. I thought it couldn't get worse, but of course, I was wrong. It wasn't just about me missing the family gathering anymore. It was like my parents had made it their personal mission to get back at me for the Mexico trip. They couldn't let it go. Every little thing I did seemed to piss them off. I'd wake up late, and they'd act like I'd committed some huge crime, like I was disrespecting their whole house or something. It felt like I couldn't breathe without them watching and judging me. But let me tell you about the day things really blew up. So, after Mexico, I kept to myself more. I didn't want to deal with their drama. I figured if I just stayed in my room and minded my own business, they'd cool off eventually. I was wrong, again. My mom had this big idea that we needed to reconnect as a family. Honestly, it felt more like they just wanted to control me, but whatever. She told me we were having a family dinner and that I had to be there, no excuses. I didn't argue. I just showed up because at that point, I didn't want to give them any more reasons to freak out on me. So, I go downstairs and it's already tense. My dad's sitting at the table, looking like he's ready to give me another lecture, and my mom's got this fake smile plastered on her face, like everything's fine. I knew it wasn't fine. I could feel the awkward energy in the room the second I sat down. My mom starts asking me about school, work, and my future plans. You know, normal stuff. I thought maybe we were just going to have a regular conversation for once. Nope. My dad jumps in and starts going off about responsibility, respect, and all that. He basically said I needed to stop acting like I was above the family. I was sitting there eating my dinner thinking, what the hell does that even mean? Above the family? Because I went on one trip with my friends? It wasn't like I skipped their get-together on purpose. I didn't even know about it until I got back. But he wasn't letting it go. He started bringing up how I never help out around the house anymore, how I don't spend time with them, how I disrespect their rules. And I just sat there, biting my tongue, trying not to blow up because I knew if I said what I was thinking, it was only going to make things worse. Then, my mom drops the bomb. Maybe we should increase your rent if you're going to act like you don't live here anymore. I swear, I nearly choked on my food. Increase my rent? Are you kidding me? I was already paying $300 a month, and now they wanted more? For what? For not being at their beck and call every second of the day? I was fuming inside, but I kept my cool. I just looked at her and said, are you serious? You're already charging me rent like I'm some stranger living here, and now you want more? My dad backed her up immediately. He started talking about how they gave me everything, how they've supported me, and now I'm just using them for a place to stay. That was the final straw for me. I stood up, looked them both in the eye, and said, I'm not using you. I've been paying rent since I was 16. You've been treating me like a tenant for years, so don't act like you're doing me some huge favor by letting me live here. It got really quiet after that. My mom tried to say something, but I just walked away. I went straight to my room, slammed the door, and started packing my stuff. I wasn't planning to leave right then, but I needed to feel like I had some control over the situation. I wasn't about to keep living in a place where I was constantly being disrespected and treated like I didn't belong. Later that night, I got a text from my mom. She said she didn't mean to make me feel unwelcome, but that they deserved more respect from me. I didn't even respond. I was done. I needed a plan, and I needed to get out of there. That's when I called my grandpa. Now my grandpa's always had my back. He was the one who helped me get my business started, gave me advice on how to handle money, and just generally looked out for me. I figured he'd be the one person who'd understand what I was going through. So, I explained everything to him. The rent, the Mexico trip, the family dinner, all of it. He was quiet for a while, and then he said something I wasn't expecting. He said, maybe it's time you moved out, for good. At first I wasn't sure how to take that. Like, did he mean I should just give up on my parents? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I was already pretty much independent. I paid my own way, I had my own business, and I was about to graduate and start a new job. What was the point of staying in a place where I was constantly being made to feel like a burden? So I started looking for places. I didn't tell my parents. I figured I'd wait until I had something lined up before I said anything. But it didn't take long for them to notice I was pulling away even more. I'd come home late, go straight to my room, and avoid them as much as possible. They tried talking to me a few times, but I just wasn't interested. I wasn't going to waste my energy on people who clearly didn't care about me unless it benefited them. Then, one night, it all came to a head. My mom knocked on my door, which was surprising because usually they just barged in, and she asked if we could talk. I didn't want to, but I figured I'd give her one last chance. So I opened the door, and she comes in with this sad look on her face, like she's the victim here. She starts telling me how hard it's been for her and Dad, how they're just trying to do what's best for me, and how they didn't mean to push me away. I sat there, listening, waiting for her to say something real, something that would actually make me feel like they understood. But it never came. Instead, she ended the whole thing by saying, "We just want you to be a part of this family again." That's when I realized they didn't get it. They didn't see me as part of the family anymore. To them, I was just someone who lived in their house and paid rent. I wasn't their kid. I was a tenant. And no amount of guilt tripping was going to change that. I stood up, told her I was moving out, and that I'd be gone by the end of the month. She didn't say anything. She just nodded and left the room. And that was it. I knew I had made the right decision. Update 1. So after I told my mom I was moving out, things got awkward real fast. They didn't really talk to me much after that, which was fine because I wasn't trying to have any deep conversations with them either. It's not like they suddenly realized they'd been treating me like crap. Nah, it was more like they were just pissed that I had the audacity to leave. But then, just when I thought things had quieted down, my grandpa shows up at the house. Now let me tell you, my grandpa is not the kind of guy who just drops by without a reason. When I saw him pull into the driveway, I knew something was up. He'd always been pretty chill, but he wasn't the type to just let stuff slide either. I figured my parents had called him, trying to get him to talk some sense into me or something. I stayed in my room, hoping he was just there to see them and not me. But after about 20 minutes, there was a knock on my door. Of course, it was Grandpa. He never really knocked on my door unless it was serious, so I braced myself for whatever was coming. I opened the door, and there he was, looking all serious. He didn't waste time with small talk. "We need to have a conversation," he said, his voice low and steady. I could tell he wasn't here for some casual chat. I sat down on my bed, figuring I might as well hear him out. He stood there for a second, looking around my room like he was trying to gather his thoughts. Then he just came out with it. "Why are you planning to move out?" At first, I was kind of shocked he even had to ask, but then I realized my parents probably spun the whole situation to make it seem like I was being unreasonable. I wasn't surprised, honestly. They've always been good at playing the victim when things don't go their way. So I told him everything. I told him about the rent, the control, the guilt trips, the Mexico fallout, and how they'd been treating me like I wasn't part of the family anymore. I explained that I didn't mind paying rent if it meant I could have some independence, but they were acting like landlords and parents whenever it suited them. I wasn't even mad anymore. I was just done with it all. Grandpa listened quietly, nodding every now and then. He didn't interrupt, which I appreciated. When I finished, he just sighed and sat down next to me. "You know," he started, "your parents aren't bad people. They're just confused." I raised an eyebrow at that. Confused? That was one way to put it. He went on, "They don't know how to balance being your parents and treating you like an adult. Charging you rent was probably their way of trying to teach you responsibility, but it got all mixed up in their heads." I stayed quiet, not really sure where he was going with this. Then he hit me with something I didn't expect. "But I don't agree with how they've handled things. Charging you rent at 16, that's not how I raised them." That kind of threw me for a loop. I'd always figured Grandpa was on their side, you know? Like he'd probably think I was being disrespectful or something. But hearing him say that, it actually felt like someone was finally on my side for once. He sighed again and leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I didn't raise them to treat family like tenants. I don't know why they did that to you, but I'm going to talk to them. This isn't right." I didn't really know what to say. I mean, it was great that Grandpa was backing me up, but at the same time, I wasn't sure if anything he said would change how my parents acted. They were so stuck in their ways, and it felt like no amount of reasoning would make them see what they were doing wrong. "Thanks, Grandpa," I said, not really knowing what else to say. I appreciated that he was willing to step in, but I wasn't holding my breath for any big changes. That's when Grandpa hit me with the big one. "I think you should stay with me for a while." Now, I hadn't expected that at all. Grandpa lived about an hour away, in this quiet little house near the mountains. It wasn't super far, but it was far enough that I wouldn't have to deal with my parents' nonsense every day. The idea of moving in with him actually sounded kind of nice, peaceful even. "You'd be able to focus on your business, finish school without all this drama," he continued. "I've got plenty of space, and you wouldn't have to pay me rent." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. No rent? A place where I could just be without all the stress? It sounded like heaven. But at the same time, I felt a little guilty. Like, shouldn't I be able to handle this on my own? Wasn't that the whole point of me paying rent in the first place? But Grandpa must have seen the hesitation on my face because he said, "This isn't about running away. It's about giving yourself some space to grow without all the pressure. You're already more independent than most people your age, but sometimes it's okay to let family help you out when things get tough." That kind of hit me. I'd been so focused on proving that I could handle everything on my own that I didn't even think about the fact that maybe I didn't have to. Maybe it was okay to take a step back and get some space from all the chaos. I nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll think about it," I said. Grandpa smiled, that kind of small, knowing smile he always had when he knew he'd said something that would stick with you. "Good, but don't take too long to decide. Your mental health is more important than trying to prove a point." After he left, I sat there for a long time just thinking. Moving in with Grandpa sounded like the best option, but I also knew it wasn't going to be easy to just leave my parents behind. Even after everything, they were still my parents. But at the same time, I couldn't keep living in this toxic situation. I needed space to figure things out for myself. That night, I started making plans. I wasn't sure exactly when I'd leave, but I knew it was going to happen soon. Grandpa was right. I needed to put myself first for once. And if that meant moving out and living with him for a while, then so be it. It was time to take control of my life, for real this time. Update 2. So, after my talk with Grandpa, I was all set on moving out, but I hadn't told my parents yet. I didn't know how they'd take it, and to be honest, I wasn't in the mood for another fight. I figured I'd just keep it quiet until I found the right moment to drop the news. But of course, things never go that smoothly, right? A couple days later, I'm in my room just chilling and going through listings for places near Grandpa's house. I was leaning more toward staying with him for a bit, but I wanted to see what other options were out there, just in case. That's when my mom knocks on the door, which, like I said before, never really happens unless something's up. I open the door and she's standing there looking all serious. "Can we talk?" she asks, and I can tell by her tone that this isn't going to be a casual chat. I sigh and let her in, figuring I might as well get it over with. She sits down on the edge of my bed, and I stay standing, leaning against my desk, waiting for whatever speech she's about to give. "We need to talk about your future," she says, and I can feel the lecture coming. She starts going on about how I've been distant lately, which, duh, of course I've been, how I'm not contributing enough to the family anymore, and how I need to take things more seriously now that I'm graduating soon. I just stood there, nodding along, but my patience was wearing thin. She hadn't once acknowledged any of the reasons I was pulling away, or the fact that I'd been paying them rent for years. Then she dropped this. "Your father and I were talking, and we think it's time you start paying more rent now that you'll have a full-time job soon." I couldn't believe it. After everything, they wanted more money? Like, really? I'm already paying $300 a month, and I'm barely even living like I'm part of the family anymore. Now they want me to pay even more just because I'm about to graduate? It felt like they didn't care about anything except what they could get out of me. I stood there for a second, just staring at her, and then I finally said, "I'm not paying more rent. In fact, I'm not paying you anything anymore. I'm moving out." That got her attention. Her eyes went wide and she looked genuinely shocked. I guess they didn't expect me to actually leave. She started asking me where I was going, how I was going to afford it, all the usual stuff. I told her I'd be staying with Grandpa for a while, and that I'd already talked to him about it. That's when things really blew up. She went off about how I was disrespecting the family by running off to live with Grandpa instead of staying with them, how they'd done so much for me, and now I was just abandoning them. It was the same guilt trip they'd been using for years. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. I cut her off mid-sentence and said, "I'm not abandoning anyone. You guys made this decision for me when you started treating me like a tenant instead of your kid. I've been paying rent since I was 16 and it's never been enough for you. Now you want more? No, I'm done." She didn't like that. She started crying, saying she didn't understand why I was being so selfish. But it wasn't about being selfish. It was about taking control of my life. They couldn't just keep using me for money while pretending they cared about me as part of the family. Just as things were heating up, my dad comes into the room, probably because he heard my mom crying. He asked what was going on, and before I could even explain, my mom starts telling him how I'm moving out and going to live with Grandpa. Now he's pissed. "You're not going anywhere," he says, like he's some kind of authority over my life. "You're going to stay here and contribute to this family like you're supposed to." I couldn't help but laugh a little at that. It was like they didn't get it at all. "I've been contributing," I said. "I've been paying you rent. I've been handling my own stuff, and you still act like I owe you something. But guess what? I don't. I'm an adult now, and I'm leaving." Now they're both yelling at me, telling me how ungrateful I am, how they've done so much for me, blah, blah, blah. It's the same old song and dance, but this time, I wasn't listening. I was done. I just stood there, letting them vent. And when they finally paused to catch their breath, I said, "I'm leaving at the end of the month, whether you like it or not." My dad was furious. He stormed out of the room, probably to cool off or whatever, but my mom stayed. She wasn't crying anymore. Now she was just looking at me like she didn't even recognize me. And honestly, I didn't recognize them anymore either. It was like we weren't even family at this point, just people living in the same house, pretending we cared about each other. She stood up, looked me in the eye, and said, "If you leave, don't expect to come back." I didn't hesitate. "I won't." She walked out and that was it. No more yelling, no more guilt trips, just silence. The next couple of weeks were tense, to say the least. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was cold and distant. But I didn't care anymore. I'd already started packing up my stuff, and I was just counting down the days until I could leave for good. Grandpa came by a couple more times during that period, mostly to check in on me and make sure everything was going okay. He didn't say much about my parents, but I could tell he was disappointed in them. He never said it out loud, but the way he acted around them made it clear. Finally, the day came. I had everything packed up, loaded into my car, and I was ready to go. My parents didn't even come out to say goodbye. They just stayed in the house, pretending like I wasn't leaving. And honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need some fake, emotional farewell. I was ready to start fresh. As I drove away, I felt this huge weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt free. No more guilt trips, no more pressure, no more feeling like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. It was just me, moving forward, ready to figure out what came next. And for the first time in a long time, I was actually excited about the future. Update 3. The day I drove away from my parents' house, I didn't really know how to feel. It was like this weird mix of relief and sadness. I mean, they're still my parents, even though they'd been treating me like a tenant for years. But at the same time, I felt like I was finally free. I didn't have to worry about their constant nagging, their controlling attitudes, or any more guilt trips. It was over. I got to Grandpa's house in about an hour. It wasn't a huge house, but it was cozy, tucked away near some mountains, with a quiet neighborhood, and not a lot of people around. The kind of place where you can just breathe, you know? Grandpa came out to help me with my bags, and we didn't say much. I think he could tell I wasn't in the mood for a big conversation. Once I had my stuff in the guest room, I just sat on the bed for a while, staring at the ceiling. It was weird, not having that tension hanging over me anymore. No more worrying about what my parents were going to say or do next. I'd been living in that stress for so long that it felt strange to be free of it. Grandpa knocked on the door after a while and asked if I wanted to go for a walk. He liked to take these long walks in the evening, and honestly, I needed to clear my head, so I said yeah. We didn't talk much while we were walking, but it felt good just to be outside, not thinking about all the crap I'd just left behind. Eventually, though, Grandpa broke the silence. "You made the right choice, you know," he said, not looking at me, just watching the road ahead of us. Sometimes family doesn't always get it right. Your parents? They're stuck in their ways, but you did what you needed to do. I nodded, not really knowing how to respond. He was right, but it still felt heavy, leaving like that. It wasn't the big dramatic exit I thought it would be. I didn't slam doors or yell at them on the way out. It just kind of happened, and now I was here trying to figure out what came next. Over the next few weeks, things started to feel more normal. I settled into a routine at Grandpa's place, helped him with stuff around the house, focused on my business, and started prepping for my new job after graduation. It was peaceful, but every now and then I'd catch myself wondering what my parents were doing. Did they miss me? Did they even care that I was gone? I hadn't heard from them since I left, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. One day, about a month after I'd moved out, I got a text from my dad. It was short, just a few words. "We need to talk." I stared at my phone for a good minute, not sure how to feel about that. What could he possibly want now? But something in me, maybe curiosity, made me text him back. I said, "Okay, when?" He replied almost immediately, "Come over tomorrow." I didn't really want to go back there, but I felt like I needed to. Like maybe this was the closure I hadn't gotten when I left. So I agreed. The next day I drove back to the house. The same house that used to feel like home, but now just felt like a place I used to live. I parked outside and just sat in the car for a while, trying to gather myself before going in. When I finally walked up to the door, it felt so weird, like I was a guest at my own parents' house. My mom opened the door, and she didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let me in. The atmosphere was tense, like they didn't really know what to say either. We all sat down in the living room, and it was like waiting for something to happen, but nobody wanted to start. Finally, my dad spoke up. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened," he said, his voice a little quieter than usual. "About how things went down." I just nodded, waiting for him to go on. My mom sat next to him, looking uncomfortable, like she didn't really want to be there. "We didn't handle it right," he continued, rubbing his hands together. "Charging you rent like that? It wasn't fair. We didn't realize how much it was affecting you." I was surprised. I didn't expect them to admit anything, let alone apologize. But my dad kept going. "We thought we were helping you, teaching you responsibility, but I guess we were just pushing you away. And when you left, well, it made us realize that maybe we were wrong." Hearing him say that was honestly kind of shocking. For years, they'd acted like they were always right, like I was the one being difficult, and now here they were admitting that they messed up. My mom finally spoke up. "We want to try and fix things," she said, her voice shaky. We don't want you to feel like you're not part of the family. I sat there, taking it all in. Part of me wanted to just let it go and forgive them, but another part of me remembered all the times they'd guilt-tripped me, all the times they treated me like I didn't matter unless I was giving them something. It wasn't that simple. I don't know, I said after a long pause. I'm glad you're saying this now, but it doesn't change what's happened. I can't just pretend everything's okay because you realized it now. They looked disappointed, but I wasn't going to back down. I couldn't. I'd worked too hard to get out of that toxic situation, and I wasn't going to just jump back into it because they suddenly felt bad. I need more time, I told them. I'm not saying we can't fix things, but it's going to take a while. I need to focus on me for a bit. They nodded, and we left it at that. It wasn't the big reconciliation they probably hoped for, but it was a start. And honestly, that's all I could give them right now. When I left the house that day, I didn't feel the same weight I had when I first moved out. This time, it felt different. Like maybe there was a chance things could get better someday, but I wasn't in a rush to find out. I had my own life to live now, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like I was really in control. Grandpa was waiting for me when I got back, and I told him everything. He didn't say much, just smiled and nodded, like he already knew how it would turn out. And maybe he did. He's always been good at that. So yeah, I'm still figuring things out, but I know one thing for sure. Leaving was the best decision I ever made.